artist didn't save me from myself, you know. No, I don't think that's true. No matter what you are or who you are and what you do, there's a you that you must deal with eventually.
Stir Crazy was one of the biggest comedies of the 1980s, but behind the cameras, things got messy in a way even Hollywood couldn't cover up. Richard Pryor was at the top of his game, and he made history with this film.
We're in prison.
Well, goddamn, man. Welcome to the real world. Not a minute too soon, I might add.
But something happened on that set that almost shut down the entire production. There was a silent protest, racism accusations, and a disturbing moment where Richard Pryor walked off the set, promising never to come back.
Tonight we begin with Richard Pryor, who died this afternoon of a heart attack at his home in California.
And when you realize the truth, you'll never see Stir Crazy the same way again. Stir Crazy wasn't just another comedy. It brought together big stars, racial tensions, clashing egos, and behind-the-scenes struggles. It also marked the first time a black actor was paid what he truly deserved. But that milestone came with a price few people understood at the time. When Stir Crazy was released on December 12, 1980, crowds didn't just show interest. They actually filled theaters across the country. The film had it all: a funny storyline, great chemistry between the actors, and great direction by the legendary Sidney Poitier. In fact, it was the kind of comedy that let people relax and laugh without worrying about the real world for a while. The numbers didn't lie. Stir Crazy did not only perform well, it exploded, grossing over $101 million, making it the third highest grossing film of 1980. For the first time, a comedy featuring a black lead and a black director was in the same conversation as a Star Wars sequel, and this wasn't something that happened every day. For Sidney Poitier, this was history. He was already known as the first black man to win a Best Actor Oscar, but Stir Crazy made him the first black director to deliver a film that cracked the $100 million mark at the box office. This was a powerful, quiet triumph that Hollywood didn't shout about at the time, but that permanently altered the landscape for black filmmakers. And Richard Pryor hit another major milestone. With Stir Crazy, he became one of the first black actors in history to be paid $1 million for a single film. This number wasn't just a number on a contract. It actually sent a message to the film industry that Richard Pryor wasn't just funny, he was also valuable. And slowly, Hollywood finally acknowledged what black audiences had known for years, that Richard was box office gold. However, behind that staggering paycheck was a complicated truth. Pryor wasn't just stepping into a movie role, he was stepping into a volatile set, filled with personal baggage, clashing expectations, and the weight of his own public and private demons. That million-dollar contract didn't just elevate Pryor, it isolated him in some ways and pushed him to the top of a mountain he wasn't sure he wanted to climb. The film's journey began across multiple locations as production moved through Manhattan, Burbank Studios, and further into the American Southwest. The film was shot in just 56 days, a brisk pace for a studio comedy, especially one involving large prison sequences, outdoor stunts, and high-pressure comedy timing. But the 56-day shoot wasn't all laughs and improvisation. Beneath the surface of every scene, there were growing tensions, personal rifts, and creative disagreements that never made it into the media. And while the cameras captured one of the most effortless-looking comedy duos in Hollywood history, something wasn't sitting right with Richard Pryor. There was a discomfort bubbling beneath his performance that didn't come from the character he was playing, but from the people he was surrounded by. And though the film raced to success by making audiences laugh, critics cheer, and studio execs richer, it left something unresolved in Pryor. The incident that halted production, While Stir Crazy performed miracles at the box office, the atmosphere during its production was far from smooth, and some of the reasons for this problem were tied to Richard Pryor. Most fans never realized that behind the scenes was a set marked by stress, unpredictability, and growing concern. The crew worked on a tight shooting schedule, but with Richard Pryor on set, every day came with a level of uncertainty that no one had quite anticipated. Richard was already a major star when filming began. He had reached a level of success that very few black entertainers had ever touched. And with this new milestone came leverage. In addition to that, Richard was also struggling with addiction, mental health, and an internal conflict that would often find its way to the surface during production. Cast and crew members later revealed that he was frequently late to set, and sometimes he didn't show up at all. On days when he did, no one was quite sure which version of Pryor they would get: the charismatic comic genius or the tense, guarded performer who didn't want to be there. For the production team, this made planning extremely difficult. Crew members were often left waiting or unsure if they could proceed or if the day would be another loss. The situation got even worse when he suddenly walked off set entirely, midway through filming, demanding additional money to continue working. Stir Crazy co-star Gene Wilder, in his autobiography, detailed the events that led up to Richard's decision. He noted that one day, during lunch break, the team was having watermelon slices. For some reason, some members of the crew began throwing the watermelon slices around like a frisbee, and one of the slices landed at Richard's feet. Given the long and painful history of racist stereotypes associated with black people and watermelon, Pryor took deep offense. Whether the act was intentional or not, it hit a nerve. He instantly felt disrespected and humiliated, and it was enough to make him walk off the set, halting production completely. But Pryor didn't just leave quietly. He made it clear that he wouldn't return to work unless he was compensated financially. This left Columbia Pictures in a difficult situation. Every day of delay meant more money lost on studio time, locations, and the large cast and crew already committed to the shoot. Replacing Pryor wasn't an option either, because the entire film revolved around the chemistry between him and Gene Wilder. The situation caused major stress behind the scenes. Some crew members worried the film might fall apart entirely. Director Sidney Poitier, known for his calm and professionalism, had a hard time keeping things together. This film wasn't just another directing job, it was a chance to prove that a black director could handle a big-budget Hollywood comedy and deliver results under pressure. Despite all the off-screen drama, when the cameras eventually began rolling again, surprisingly, Pryor and Wilder's on-screen energy didn't seem affected by the conflict. They remained sharp, funny, and totally in sync. It was hard to believe how much tension was happening behind the scenes, because none of it showed up on screen. But this chemistry didn't necessarily extend off-screen. While they had chemistry in front of the camera, their personal relationship was more distant off-screen. Wilder later described Pryor as brilliant but troubled. Pryor was someone he admired professionally but couldn't always connect with emotionally. The tension between them wasn't hostile, but it was real. They had different personalities, different temperaments, and very different coping mechanisms. Wilder was steady, committed, and focused. Pryor was spontaneous, intense, and unpredictable. Unsurprisingly, during the Stir Crazy shoot, those differences became more pronounced. But despite the instability, the cast and crew rarely spoke publicly about the difficulties during filming. The film's release was followed by massive commercial success, and in Hollywood, success has a way of covering up what happened behind the curtain. But in private conversations, memoirs, and later interviews, fragments of the truth emerged. And they all pointed back to the same thing. Pryor was struggling deeply, and those struggles really impacted the entire production. For Columbia Pictures, the gamble paid off financially. Stir Crazy was a blockbuster, but for those involved in making it, it was a more complicated experience, defined by artistic highs and personal lows. And for Pryor himself, the film marked both a professional milestone and a personal breaking point. He had proven his worth. He had broken barriers. But the toll it took was one that would follow him into other parts of his life. Legal and cultural clashes. Although Stir Crazy made its way to box office success, not everything surrounding the film was worth celebrating. Despite its commercial impact, the production soon became entangled in legal and cultural debates that followed it long after its theatrical run. Although the controversy didn't derail its financial performance, it highlighted just how divided the public and critical response truly was. Not long after the film's release, Stir Crazy became the subject of a lawsuit for screenplay infringement. A comedy writer named Andrew Smith claimed that the film's plot was lifted from his own screenplay, The Ku Klux Klux Company. Smith alleged that his story, which also involved two wrongly accused men in bizarre circumstances, had been circulated in Hollywood years earlier, and he argued that too many similarities existed for it to be a coincidence. The case attracted moderate attention, mainly because of the film's visibility. However, upon further review, the lawsuit was dismissed. The court found no substantial evidence of plagiarism or proof that Smith's script had directly influenced Stir Crazy. The dismissal ended the legal challenge, but the mere existence of the suit added a layer of tension to the film's legacy. For some critics, it raised questions about how Hollywood acquires ideas and how original voices are sometimes left unrecognized, especially in a system dominated by big studios and bigger egos. But this wasn't the only controversy Stir Crazy faced. The film also received a Golden Raspberry Award nomination, popularly known as a Razzie, in its inaugural year for a performance that stirred cultural debates. Georg Stanford Brown, a well-known actor and director, played a supporting character who dresses in drag during a key scene. The Razzies listed him under Worst Supporting Actress, making the nomination a punchline that didn't sit right with everyone. At the time, Brown's performance was played for laughs, typical of the kind of broad comedy seen in the late 70s and early 80s. However, the Razzie nomination brought some negative attention to questions of gender representation, typecasting, and whether the role mocked or celebrated its subject matter. Some viewers shrugged it off as harmless humor, while others found the nomination and the way the character was written to be crude, outdated, or offensive. Stir Crazy also received sharply divided reviews, which showed a clear gap between what the public loved and what reviewers thought. Roger Ebert, one of the most influential film critics of the time, gave the film 2 out of 4 stars. In his review, he noted that while the beginning showed promise, the movie loses its way once the prison storyline takes over. He felt that the characters, despite their potential, became caricatures, and that the plot shifted from clever to chaotic. Another reviewer, Vincent Canby, who wrote for the New York Times, was even less impressed. He described Stir Crazy as a prison comedy of stunning humorlessness. Canby didn't hold back. He believed the film failed to deliver on its setup and relied too heavily on physical gags that didn't land. To him, the film wasn't just unfunny, it was also forgettable. But not every critic was as dismissive. Some respected the film's voice and focused more on the performers than the plot. While they didn't rave about the film as a whole, They called Pryor's performance funny and praised his natural charisma. Some noted that Pryor brought unpredictability to the role and a kind of raw energy that made even weaker scenes memorable. Interestingly, this split between critics and the fans created two competing narratives around Stir Crazy. And yet, these legal and cultural debates didn't slow the film's momentum. The lawsuit was quietly dropped. The Razzie nomination eventually died down, and the mixed reviews were overshadowed by the film's box office numbers. But for Richard Pryor, these moments may have added to a growing list of pressures he carried silently. Because behind the scenes during the film's production, Richard wasn't just dealing with movie critics and industry politics. He was facing challenges that had nothing to do with Hollywood. Richard Pryor's personal battles. By the time Stir Crazy hit theaters in 1980, Richard Pryor was already one of the most influential comedians in the world. However, most people didn't realize that behind closed doors, he was a different man entirely, who was carrying a lifetime of pain. For years, Richard battled substance addiction, a struggle that followed him through much of the 1970s and into the 80s. These substances weren't just something he experimented with. They actually became a part of his lifestyle and were deeply tied into his creativity. He used them as a form of escape from the things he didn't want to face. And he was even open about his use in his comedy, often making jokes about it on stage. But in reality, those jokes were far more serious. In June 1980, just months before Stir Crazy was released, Pryor experienced a life-changing and nearly fatal accident. While using a dangerous method to handle a substance, there was an explosion, and he suffered third-degree burns across more than half of his body. Reports at the time said he ran down the street, screaming for help, and was later rushed to the hospital, where he spent over 6 weeks recovering in intensive care. What shocked people wasn't just the accident itself. It was the fact that he later used the incident in his stand-up. He made it part of his routine, turning one of the darkest moments of his life into something the audience could laugh at. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest and classic. But the pain ran deeper than many knew, because Richard Pryor grew up in Peoria, Illinois, in an environment most people couldn't imagine. He was raised in his grandmother's brothel, where his mother worked. His father was often absent, and his childhood was full of instability. At just 14 years old, he was expelled from school, already drifting into a world that offered very few safety nets. He later shared that he had experienced maltreatment as a child, and this was something he carried into adulthood. While he spoke about it sparingly, most people didn't realize that it shaped his view of the world and deeply affected how he saw himself. He often said that comedy became his way of coping, a method for turning personal pain into punchlines. But the laughs were never just jokes. They were glimpses into a man who had survived far more than most. Throughout his career, Pryor used the stage to tell the truth. He talked about racism, addiction, family, relationships, and fear. He didn't hold back, and his audiences laughed. But they also listened, because Pryor's comedy was always layered with real-life experience. He didn't create characters to hide behind. He was the character, and the material he used wasn't made up, but was taken directly from his life. In 1995, Pryor released his memoir, Pryor Convictions and Other Life Sentences, which offered an even deeper look into the struggles he faced behind the scenes. In the book, he wrote openly about his mental health, including periods of depression and emotional breakdowns. He admitted to terrible habits and times when he pushed people away, ruined opportunities, or treated himself unfairly because he didn't know how to ask for help. He also talked about how his fame made things harder. People saw the success, the sold-out shows, and the million-dollar contracts. What they didn't see was the loneliness that followed. Fame gave him money and attention, but it didn't heal the damage done in his younger years. If anything, it made it harder to be honest with himself, because everyone expected him to always be perfect for the cameras. But many of his friends and colleagues saw the cracks forming early on. They described Pryor as a genius with unmatched talent. However, they also saw him as someone who struggled to feel loved or even understood. He could be kind and generous one day, and withdrawn and angry the next. In fact, while speaking about the watermelon incident that happened on the set of Stir Crazy, Gene Wilder said, "I assume now that Richard was using substances during Stir Crazy." Despite all this, Pryor never stopped performing. Even after the accident and breakdowns, he kept showing up on stage, in films, and on talk shows, giving everything he had to his audience. And somehow, that pain translated into some of his best work, just like Stir Crazy. The more honest he became, the more people respected him, not just as a comedian, but as a man who refused to pretend that life was perfect. What made him even more unique wasn't just his comedy, but his willingness to share the darkest parts of his story to establish true connection with his audiences. He knew people were hurting, just like he was, and he believed that laughter could be a bridge and a form of therapy. As the years passed, his health began to decline, and the energy he once brought to every role and performance started to fade. But the emotional weight he carried remained. His body was breaking down, but his mind stayed sharp. And while his fans still remembered him for the good times, especially the laughter he brought to their screens, Pryor himself began confronting a quieter truth about his legacy. Pryor's final curtain. When the mid-1980s rolled around, Richard Pryor had already lived several lifetimes in one. He had broken records, rewritten the rules of comedy, battled addiction, and laid his pain bare for the world to see. But in 1986, he eventually faced a new challenge that he couldn't outrun, joke about, or even push aside. That year, Pryor was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic disease that affects the central nervous system. Multiple sclerosis is often unpredictable and weakens the body over time by attacking mobility, speech, and motor function. For someone like Pryor, whose voice, timing, and physical expressions were central to his identity, the diagnosis was beyond devastating. But even as his condition progressed, Pryor refused to disappear from the spotlight. In fact, he kept working. Although his speech slowed and his walk changed, he still found ways to perform and even make light of the illness. He didn't try to hide his condition. Instead, he used it in his work. He was honest with his audience, as he always had been. One of his most memorable performances during this time was in the TV medical drama Chicago Hope. Richard guest starred in a powerful 1995 episode, playing the role of a man living with multiple sclerosis. It was one of his most vulnerable and moving roles, and it struck a chord with audiences and critics alike. For that performance, Pryor was nominated for an Emmy Award, proof that even with a failing body, his talent was still strong. But behind the scenes, the disease was taking its toll. It got so bad that his family members revealed that it was painful to watch someone once so full of life move with such difficulty. But they also pointed out that Richard wasn't one to give up his sense of humor, even when his body began to shut down. In the late 1990s, Pryor began to appear in public less often. His speech became more limited, and he started using a wheelchair full-time. But the respect he had earned only grew. In 1998, the Kennedy Center honored him as the first ever recipient of the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. It was a huge moment, not just for Pryor, but for comedy itself. The award recognized his unmatched impact on American culture and celebrated his ability to use humor to speak hard truths. He accepted the award in person, delivering a few short, heartfelt words that brought the audience to its feet. By the early 2000s, Pryor's public appearances were rare. He lived quietly, mostly at home, surrounded by a small circle of loved ones. His health continued to decline, and he was in and out of hospitals for various complications related to multiple sclerosis. But according to his wife, Jennifer Lee Pryor, his final days weren't filled with sorrow. In interviews after his passing, she described him as happy and in good humor. Despite the heartbreaking fact that the disease had slowly taken so much from him, Pryor still found ways to laugh and connect with the people around him. On December 10, 2005, Richard Pryor passed away after suffering a third and fatal heart attack. He was rushed to a Los Angeles hospital where he was pronounced dead at the age of 65. The world lost a groundbreaking entertainer, but more importantly, it lost a man who had fought hard for survival. Right from childhood, he had endured a life filled with instability to decades of battling inner demons. Yet, in his final moments, his wife, Jennifer, said he passed away with a smile on his face. The reaction to Richard's death was deeply emotional. Tributes poured in from fans, comedians, actors, and public figures. He had inspired a generation of performers from Eddie Murphy to Dave Chappelle. To this day, Richard Pryor's influence can still be felt. His voice echoes through every comic who dares to say something uncomfortable, through every performer who uses humor to process pain, and in every story where someone speaks their truth, no matter how messy it is. Even though Stir Crazy made history at the box office and became one of the most iconic comedy films of its time, not everything about the movie was as lighthearted as it looked on screen. Behind the scenes, there were unexpected choices, little-known facts, and strange moments that the studio never advertised, and most fans never even noticed. The true story of Stir Crazy is filled with details that reveal just how unusual the production really was. What the studio never wanted you to know. On the surface, Stir Crazy was a comedy film about two unlucky men who get thrown into prison for a crime they didn't commit. But beneath the laughs and one-liners was a production full of unusual decisions and creative risks that shaped the final film in ways that are rarely discussed. One of the most surprising facts about the film is where some of it was shot. The prison rodeo scenes, which include some of the most memorable moments in the movie, weren't staged on a Hollywood backlot. They were actually filmed in a real maximum security prison in Arizona, the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. That choice brought a level of realism to the film that's often overlooked. The prison wasn't just a background prop, it was an active facility housing actual inmates during production. The decision to film in a working prison gave the movie a gritty, authentic look. But it also made things more intense for the cast and crew. Security was tight, schedules were strict, and the environment wasn't exactly comfortable. Yet the filmmakers pushed forward, believing that the real setting would help the film stand apart from other prison comedies. Adding to the film's unexpected elements was a small musical detail that often surprises fans. Gene Wilder actually sang one of the songs in the movie Crazy. Wilder wasn't typically seen as a musical performer, especially in films outside of his work with Mel Brooks. But in Stir Crazy, he lent his voice to one of the tracks, setting the tone for one of the most iconic scenes. Another surprising piece of trivia involves one of the movie's most unforgettable characters, Grossberger, the silent, hulking inmate who intimidates everyone but eventually becomes an unexpected ally to the main characters. Grossberger was played by Erland van Leeth, a man who, at first glance, looked like he belonged in a wrestling ring or action film. But behind his imposing appearance was a remarkable story. Van Lieth wasn't just an actor. He was also a trained opera singer and a graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In real life, he balanced his time between opera rehearsals and studying computer science. His deep baritone voice was used in other performances, but in Stir Crazy, he was intentionally kept silent to maintain the mystery around his character. Ironically, the man with one of the best-trained voices in the cast never got to speak a word on screen. The success of Stir Crazy also inspired Hollywood to try something that, in hindsight, was probably a mistake, and that was turning it into a TV show. In 1985, CBS launched a television adaptation of Stir Crazy, hoping to capitalize on the popularity of the original film. But there was a problem, as neither Richard Pryor nor Gene Wilder was involved. Their chemistry had been the heart of the movie, and without them, the show struggled to connect with audiences. The TV version featured new actors playing the same roles, but it couldn't recreate the magic. The humor felt forced, the writing was weak, and viewers quickly lost interest. The series was canceled after just a handful of episodes. Today, it's mostly forgotten and serves as a reminder of how difficult it is to bottle lightning twice. For Richard Pryor, Stir Crazy ended up being more than just a hit film. It became a source of reflection. In later interviews and during his stand-up routines, he would reference the chaos and unpredictability of the Stir Crazy set. He talked about how the stress of filming, the conflicts, the walkouts, and the pressure forced him to confront parts of himself he had ignored. But at the end of the day, he didn't shy away from it. Instead, he used it. Comedy had always been Pryor's outlet, and he once again turned his experience into material for the stage. In his shows, he poked fun at the absurdity of Hollywood, the stress of dealing with executives, and even the way people treated him once the big paychecks started coming in. What could have been just another difficult shoot became a chapter in his evolving story that shaped his voice as a performer and, ultimately, as a person. And yet, for all its behind-the-scenes problems, Stir Crazy remains a fan favorite. The film continues to resonate and is a reminder that sometimes, even when things seem like they're falling apart during production, something unique can emerge on screen. Do you think Richard Pryor made the right decision by walking off the set of Stir Crazy? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.